personality, Cleveland. Interviewing top sports personalities from around the nation in order to provide you next-level insight and analysis into your Cleveland Browns. Blue Wire Hustle proudly presents All Eyes on Cleveland. And now, here is your host, Brad Ward.
What's happening? It's a special bonus edition, All Eyes on Cleveland on a Saturday. The Jarvis Landry softball game is going on out there. We've got an incredibly special guest for you today. His name is Zack Moore. He has his MBA. He wrote a book called Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. He did a lot of study on the Browns and Sashi Brown and John Dorsey and the path that the Browns have taken to getting better. And he's here to talk about team building, pre and post quarterback contract. He's done some work with NFL teams. He was an NFLPA certified agent, so he's worked with players in negotiations and other things. Very interesting individual Zack is, and I think you will really, really enjoy his interview today on our show. We're going to get to that here in just a second. First and foremost, I want to thank you for tuning in, and as always, and you guys are fantastic. While you are here watching the show, if you could hit the like button, just tap that like button, hit subscribe. We're doing great. We're getting up there in subscribers, and we're doing big things. I'm going to have some big announcements for All Eyes on Cleveland. Big things coming down the line that you guys are really going to like, I think, a lot about the channel and just what we're going to do, even beyond just being a podcast channel, just for the Browns community in general. And I think everybody will be really happy about all of those things. But without any further ado, let's get you to the interview this afternoon. Let's get you to Zack Moore. Mikey, you have this queued up here, sir. All right, we're going to go ahead and make that transition. And fantastic guest, and we thank Zack. He's works at the as a writer for the overthecap.com. Fantastic website where you can get all your salary cap information. He was a certified NFLPA agent and wrote a book called Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. Without any further ado, let's get you to Zack Moore. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce a very special guest to All Eyes on Cleveland tonight. His name is Zack Moore. Zack is a certified NFLPA agent, a writer for overthecap.com, as well as author of Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. Welcome to All Eyes on Cleveland, Zack. It's fantastic to have you. How you doing?
I'm good. I wanted to correct. I let my certification lapse. I've taken a new direction towards jiu-jitsu and the stuff we've got going on here in Austin, comedy, jiu-jitsu, everything's here. So I've made a little bit of a career change, but I am happy to be here with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I noticed that as well. I was going to ask you about the MMA, the jiu-jitsu. So what are you doing with that now? We'll get into the football in a minute, but what are you doing with that now?
We have probably one of the, probably the best school in the country in terms of people wanting to come here and visit us too as well. We've become sort of a mecca for jiu-jitsu and for fighting. We've developed an MMA team in just the last year. We've got guys that are on the cusp of becoming professionals, and our jiu-jitsu, our head coach and our owner of the gym actually just moved back from Alaska. He moved up there to help out his tribe, his Native American tribe, the Kanatse Indian tribe. He got in a little bit of a war with their tribal council for the good of the tribe, and he won his war. And it only took him a year, and he came on back down here. And so I saw him for the first time in a year last night. But we're growing a big school. We've got a great coach named Gabe Tuttle. He's Joe Rogan's, seems to be Joe Rogan's personal jiu-jitsu coach right now. And just we're kind of making our way, and we're a young school, but we're on the way.
Is that the 10th planet? Is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah, 10th Planet Austin, underneath Eddie Bravo, whom some of y'all may know as the conspiracy guy on Joe Rogan's podcast. So
very cool. So I'm sure some of our fans will want to check that out for sure, and that's pretty cool stuff there, Zach. Now let's get back into some of your football accomplishments. Obviously, you wrote a book, Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. I've got a number of reviews here and everything, but I'm sure you can explain it better than anybody. And I'll go ahead and bring up the photo here of the book. Go ahead and tell me a little bit about this book.
So it was a study of, I guess, to go back. My father and I used to visit Austin when I was a kid. And I'm from New Jersey, but we had a friend down here who was an author, and he's a very prestigious, he's written a lot of books. His name's Russ Hall. And through understanding and knowing him, I realized that the way to learn about things was to write about them. And I had a goal of becoming an NFL agent, which also, studying the salary cap became a goal of maybe working for a team, things like that. Goals change, and then, but I realized that the way to learn about contracts and the way to learn about the salary cap was to write about it. So I started writing about it on my personal blog, and then I came on to Over the Cap and started writing about it there. And then I, found this information with Caponomics and Building Super Bowl Champions, which was able to condense all of my research into one narrative, right? Like, what are we trying to do? What's the objective? We're trying to succeed. We're trying to win Super Bowls. Even if you're just trying to increase the valuation of your franchise as an owner, you're in a position where you're the best way to do that is to be successful, and to be successful continuously. And so that first book, which then became a second book, it really just studied, a lot of the 20, at that point it was 23 salary cap era champions. I looked at how they spent their money, what they did, and I looked for inefficiencies, things that were efficient, things that seemed to correlate with success, things that seemed to correlate with a lack of success. And over that time, I really kind of molded myself into an expert about just team building strategies in general, and kind of war, I don't like to overuse the term war, but kind of like war strategies of. I think similarly with the jiu-jitsu and MMA now is that, and I read books about war strategy as well. And Musashi says, and it's a quote Rogan quotes often, is that when you know the way in one thing, you can, or if you know the way broadly, you can see it in all things. And that's kind of where my field of study is. And it's served me well in being able to articulate some of these concepts in football and now in my other avenues,
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, man. It's and from the stuff that I looked at, it's very detailed, very much, salary cap allocation, very analytical approach to things, and that's something that, as Cleveland Browns fans, we're incredibly interested in, obviously, because of Paul DePodesta and the chief strategy officer for the Browns, and kind of the approach that he has brought to this organization from day one with Sashi Brown. And we'll kind of get into that to start for the Browns here, since that's right up your avenue, right? So the Browns were 1-31, and this is going all the way back to '99. They've sucked with the exception of 1 year, really, right? And it's been a struggle. But GM Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta came in same time. Sashi Brown, wasn't successful as a general manager as far as winning games, but he acquired a ton of draft assets and really ripped it down to the studs, right? Just ripped it down to bare nothing. And as fans, we struggled through that for 2 years with Hugh Jackson as the head coach. It was bad, rough times, right? And not to mention that during that time span, they put us on Hard Knocks and everything. So, it was very laughing stock of the league. Well, GM entered John Dorsey's hire, okay? John Dorsey enters, who is kind of the opposite of Paul DePodesta. He's an old school football guy, not analytical, kind of just a scout through and through, right? And he did a great job, though, with the Browns of just adding an influx of talent, right? Like he really he drafted pretty well for the most part. And he hit on some key players in the draft, and he added guys like Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham through trades, and really brought some star power and things like that to the Browns. Then he had the opportunity where it was kind of a battle in Cleveland, right? Where it was the analytical side versus John Dorsey. Ownership kind of tipped the cap to Dorsey, like, hey, you're doing well here. We'll let you make this coaching hire, right? When it was time to hire. Well, he rolled with Freddie Kitchens, his guy, and it got him fired, right? It was in retrospect, it was not a very smart hire. A guy with not much experience there, kind of riding the wave of the success they felt at the end of the prior season, going into 2019, a ton of hype, and they laid an egg. The team did, and Kitchens gets fired after 1 year. So then they decided to go the route of DePodesta, where he wanted to go initially, and they kind of did it backwards, because I always think you hire a GM first and let the GM hire the coach, but they hired Kevin Stefanski, because that was DePodesta's guy from day one. A very analytical guy and a great head coach, or a good coach, from what we've seen so far. He's been terrific in Cleveland. And then they bring in Andrew Berry, the youngest GM in football. He is in his second year now. Year one, he kind of remade the offensive line, dedicated a lot of the draft assets towards that, and adding Austin Hooper, offensive side of the ball. Let's get Baker all the weapons we can and protect him. And then year two, they've really remade their defense in free agency in the draft. Just kind of overall thoughts on that whole process. Is that something that teams will try to duplicate, Zach? Because it has kind of worked. And then secondly, where where you're at with where the Browns are right now, and your thoughts on what Andrew Berry has done.
So I've been a fan of what they've done since the day I saw it started. That first book, the second book has more of an explanation, and that'll come out when I have a third book that I just finished a book proposal on. So that Caponomics, how NFL champions are built and dynasties are destroyed. I had a publisher for that. We didn't see eye to eye. So I've got that ready for the next go round of publishing in this next book I've got coming.
Something to look for, yeah.
Yeah, and so I really got into where they were a little bit more in the current moment. But in the beginning, that first book, Building Super Bowl Champions, that was completed and released in January 2018. I think which was after one of those years that turned into 1-32, right? That was 2016, 2017, where they went 1-31.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So even back then, I knew what was on the horizon, and what's on the horizon is what we saw last year, and what we're going to see this year, which is we talked about this before the show, is that cap carryover was always very important, but especially important due to what's happened over the last 16 months, right? Like where a lot of teams are in a bit of a crunch. We're in a situation where we're talking about a potential of right now the Browns have $20.6 million in cap space after their top 51, according to overthecap.com. And Over the Cap says there's $9.8 million to the cap ceiling for 2022 based on their current amount of outlays to the cap, right? They gave a lot of money to Myles Garrett. They still have, Odell, and they still have Jarvis. But to speak on those, especially on Odell, one of the interesting things about what Dorsey did was he went out and traded for someone who then he becomes increasingly less expensive because the signing bonus is not prorated out across the length of that deal. That was left with the Giants, and so there were so many interesting things, ingredients to what has happened. The fact that they went 1-31 was actually a good thing. It put them in this position where they got, and they drafted at important positions. They drafted a pass rusher. They drafted a pass defender in Denzel Ward, and they drafted a passer. Those are the roles that you're going to want to invest high draft picks in, invest a lot of money in. Defensive end is a little bit more complicated. I'm more of a mind of cycling guys through, but Myles Garrett is obviously top notch, top of the food chain type of athlete. And when we're talking about Cleveland has all this cap space because of what's happened. Now, that regime that went 1-31, they didn't draft well, And a lot of people would look back at the Carson Wentz deal and be like, why did they trade away? That Carson Wentz deal, as I detail in both books, is like that deal ended up being this, you've got a ton of draft picks and a lot of those draft picks didn't work out. But what ended up happening was they were just basically accumulating cap space, accumulating draft picks, and they were accumulating cap space as well because they had so many draft picks too, because they had so many guys who didn't cost them anything. That's one of the major issues with the NFL is that about 60, and this is putting my agent hat on, right? About 60% of the NFL is in their first 4 years, 60 to 65%. So the rest of them, the 35, 40%, are the guys that have moved on to the second contract, third contract, and so on. Only about 12 to 15% of the league is in year 8 or higher. So it's not a sport where there's a lot of longevity, right? We know this. In that scenario, what we're talking about is that they had all that cheap labor basically. And that puts us in the position we're in right now where we're looking at, and that's why kind of Browns fans have been the main, I got a buddy, Jack Duffin from the UK, big Browns.
I know fan. Jack.
You know Jack. Yeah. Yep. And Jack knows his stuff, and he's a big supporter and reader of what I've done. And people like that with the Browns have been super interested in the processes that I'm talking about, because you've gotten to watch it firsthand and watch it play out. And while there were those dark days, now we're looking at a team that may have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, has a tremendous defense, has probably the best running back tandem in the league. Maybe the most, arguably the most talented receiver group potentially. I don't know what we see out of Odell and Landry, but those are two guys that I don't see mentioned as one of the top receiver duos in the NFL, but talent wise, they're up there with anyone. So you've got a team now that is able to strike, really. I mean, the reasoning behind I can't find much reasoning behind why they might not be capable of a deep playoff run and maybe even a Super Bowl, and which is a crazy thing to think about. And it's crazy to the untrained eye to see where they were 5 years ago and see where they are now. But a plan was implemented, and and as you say, to see other teams doing it, the Miami Dolphins did it, but they did it in kind of hyperspeed. They had some assets that they got rid of and got a lot back for. And then further on that, they, but it all comes back to the quarterback, right? I mean, it all comes back to, is Tua the guy? Is Baker the guy? And it's without question the most important position in the sport and the most important investment. And, as we're going to talk about, we're coming up on Baker Mayfield needing a second contract. And so that kind of becomes where, team structures kind of change. But with $9.8 million in cap space in 2022 and almost $20 million that could be rolled over or utilized this year for some of the stuff we're going to talk about, Cleveland's in a very good position. I mean, they could be at $30.4 million in cap space if they were to just merely roll over that cap space into next year. And then speaking of Landry and Odell, those are two guys that could clear $30 million if both of them would release $15 million apiece, basically. So they have Kareem Hunt could be cleared for $6.25 million next year too. Joel Bitonio he could clear for $10 million, but we're not. He's not going to get released or traded. I don't think, right? But so the team has a ton of flexibility to enter this new stage of team building, and they're going to face the same issues that other teams face when they pay a quarterback and a defensive end a ton of money and potentially a cornerback as well. But they've situated themselves nicely.
Yeah, that's what gets interesting. Really, I wanted to ask you this about that, Zach. As far as before we get into Baker's potential extension here. He's got 2 years before the new money on his extension will hit, right? So do the Browns need to look at that like a 2-year window where they got to strike now because the total ability to build the team changes when that new contract hits? Because there's teams that, the way you build a team before quarterback money is on the books and then after quarterback money is on the books. And it seems to be rather restrictive at times.
Yeah, that is a main point of focus for me, right? With both books, the conversation starts with the quarterback. If you have a rookie contract quarterback, you're in a position where you've got a guy getting paid, I think it's like, how much is Baker getting paid this year? Is it like a $8 million, $9 million type of thing? What is he at? No. He was a first overall pick, so he might be at whatever it is. I'm thinking about Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's the thing that jumps out to me, right? Lamar Jackson was a 32nd overall pick, and when you look at the Ravens and what they've been able to do with him, he goes from a guy who's making like $2 million a year, but he's providing you $32 million worth of value, right?
Yeah.
So you go from this scenario where you've got a rookie contract quarterback making X amount of dollars, and he's providing you 3x, 5x, 10x the value.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's kind of so to bring it back, the first year that I started looking at this stuff was the year that Russell Wilson and the Seahawks won the Super Bowl. And I said to myself, all right, you got a quarterback who cost a 0.5% of the salary cap. And then simultaneously, the Seahawks at that time had spent the most out of any Super Bowl champion on their defensive line. They had spent about 27% of the salary cap on their D line. And they got a lot of value on the back end, on their defensive backfield as well. They drafted extremely well there as well. And then they had Russell Okung was making a bunch of money. They even had money wasted. They had money wasted on Zack Miller and Sidney Rice. And so I looked at the Russell Wilson contract and I said that this must be the biggest advantage in sports, which is having a competent rookie contract quarterback. And
no question.
Unfortunately for the Browns with Baker, the plan was, I believe, and I think this is the right plan, and this is how I kind of saw it play out, was that part of that Carson Wentz deal was, as a Browns fan, you've drafted quarterbacks in the first round before. You drafted players to bad teams. And this team's still bad. So you have to build a team, and then what's ended up happening is Baker gets inserted into a team that is on its way to being competent. The only problem in that whole scenario is that increasingly so over the course of my research, I recognized the importance of the offensive coordinator, probably the most undervalued person within an organization in terms of how we perceive them. And so when I say I overlooked the coordinator, I understood a coordinator was important, but we all, I think myself included, don't or haven't historically put enough value on that offensive coordinator. And I think that as a industry, with people like Kevin Clark writing so eloquently about how Andy Reid, the magic that is what he does intellectually, and what we know about Bill Walsh, and just kind of extending on that concept. And I even experienced it in martial arts, right? Like, you have a good coach, your coach just programs you to do things. Offense with a good coach has programmed that offense to run efficiently in ways that are probably above our level of complexity, our understanding. And so with Baker, he went through who was the head coach's rookie year?
Hugh Jackson.
Right.
He went through 4 coordinators in 3 years. Pretty remarkable, yeah. This
is the conversation that we always used to have about Alex Smith, right? Is that Alex Smith went through like 7 coordinators in his first 6 or 8 years. Mm-hmm. And then once we got to see him with Andy Reid, it was like, wow, like maybe this is who he always could have been. And you're looking for traits, right? You're looking for specific traits when you're talking about an Andy Reid offense. You're looking for a guy who's accurate enough, who doesn't turn the ball over, who's mobile. To this, we speak and we see Baker with Kevin Stefanski. And also when I see Stefanski's offense and what he did with Minnesota, especially the year prior, and then you got, 2 outside receivers in Landry and Odell, 2 guys on the outside doing that. And then you add in Austin Hooper, and you still got Njoku, right? And I mean, it's a offense with weapons everywhere. Yes. So, he's now finally in a position where, you would hope he'd be in from day one. But the problem with this experience was that, a few years were wasted, and now we're heading into when he's going to be more expensive. And now the team's also in a position where you've got to hope on, he is the player that he was in the second half of last season, in the second half of his rookie year with Freddie Kitchens. And, we're talking about a guy who, because when you're talking about that extra money, that bigger money, and I talked to Jack Duffin before we spoke, and he's like, I thought Mayfield might happen this off season, but when Dak got $40 million, it becomes a whole nother equation. The market has now gone from 30 to 40 million in a very short order. In a couple of years, and we're in the middle of a time period too where even if I know that part of what's going on with the NFL and a lot of these professional sports leagues is the TV deals that they're about to get from a country that we're not very friendly with, and so they see things increasing in a major way. Yeah. And so I think that's part of what this quarterback market is why it's going this way. Is it's the one spot where money just seems to keep getting shoved into. Yeah. But at that same time, that further makes that rookie contract quarterback even more valuable potentially. Yeah. If we're talking about now, quarterbacks are $45 million, depending on the salary cap. I mean, the salary, this is independent of the salary cap. No matter how much it goes up, 45 versus 3 million or 8 million or 15 million or whatever, becomes a really big difference. And, Baker's on that cusp. So the team building strategies change, but we're in a situation where there's so much that could happen in terms of, and we don't know what that TV deal could look like or what the other TV deals could look like. So we could be looking at a different reality in a few years, but point still remains.
Yeah, it's interesting, Zach, that they implemented a cap ceiling, right, for next year. It's going to bump $25 million. We know that TV money is there, and we know from most reports that it's huge, right? It's huge money. So, we saw the cap decrease because of the pandemic, and there's this cap crunch season, but they had to put a ceiling on it already, I think, just to... And that's a $25 million jump, which is advantageous for teams like the Browns, right? And then, obviously, I think it'll probably go to that point or very close to it. And then, just so that it all doesn't hit at once, right? Like it would normally in their equation of how they would figure that out. So, I mean, they came out with that already at like 208 or whatever, right? So that's interesting that they did that already. You're watching All Eyes on Cleveland. Special guest tonight, Zack Moore. Zack is a writer at overthecap.com as well as author of Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions, among many other things that we discussed. And you can check that out, obviously, by just going back about 10 minutes and listening to all of his ventures. Now, let's take a look real quick. We're going to dive into these extension talks, and I'll get a little bit into it here and get your opinions on these. And I just really want you to, Zach, just, I know it's hard to do because you're going to have a Browns fan base reacting to this, but if you were the guy, what would you do? That's what I just want. You're an expert at this stuff. You've really broken this stuff down. If you were the guy, you seem to have a real good grasp on, where Mayfield's at and everything. So if you were the guy, what would you do? So let's start with Baker. Let's throw it out there. I'm going to give you some of my thoughts real quick on this, and we'll kind of bring up some graphics here, but we'll start with, our thumbnail for our show here. And there it is of Over the Cap and author of Caponomics. So we're going to take a look here at some of the top paid quarterbacks, but you're right. I think 40 million is kind of like the bar now, right? Since Dak came to the table. Yep. You've got very impactful guys around Baker in Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. I think, whoever goes first will kind of set what happens next, I think. I don't think it behooves either side, the Browns or Baker, to want to get the deal done prior to this season. If I'm looking at it from the Browns' point of view, I want to see some more data points on Baker before I sign the deal. Yeah. If I'm looking at it from Baker's camp, I want that extra money that's going to be available next offseason. If you come to the table this year, I think the Browns could say, hey, cap crunch year. I know the new money's not till then, but maybe we try 35 or whatever. There could be savings if they go to the table now. But I think that paying a quarterback a ton of money is a good problem to have. So I'm okay with kicking the can one more year. The only thing that I'm curious about, and you can give your thoughts on this too, is how does that affect Baker mentally? Because 2021, I look at as part of this Super Bowl window the Browns potentially could have. They have a loaded roster after bulking up on the defense. I really think they have a shot to make a nice run this year if things came together well. Do you want Baker to feel like, oh, I'm signed, I'm the guy of the future, or oh, I'm the guy that needs to go out and prove it one more time for my deal? Which is better? Which is optimal for this team's performance?
Now, who are we talking about here? We're talking about Baker Mayfield. Now, having a chip on his shoulder has never not served him well. So the pressure of playing, like that's what comes to mind with me is that like if anyone can deal with being told or feeling like, whatever emotions that might come together of not getting that contract prior to whatever they tell him for why they haven't signed him yet, if they're still trying to look more. I mean, Baker might be able to read between the lines, but he's the kind of guy that doesn't care. I mean,
yeah, it'll drive him. Yeah.
Having a chip on his shoulder and feeling like he has something to prove, it may be his best mode of operation, right? Like mentally, one of the great things about training jiu-jitsu is that like I get to be reminded of the mental side of the sport and the things that go into it, and chips on your shoulder and intellectually and all these, and just thinking back of think about playing football and things like that, and thinking of who Baker Mayfield is. Having a chip on his shoulder. I'm a guy from Jersey. Like having a chip on your shoulders is sometimes a great driver. And yes. I don't worry about him mentally
in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't worry about him dealing with that mentally. We have seen a guy like Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco in 2012 won a Super Bowl, wondering if they were interested in re-signing him, and he went out and played. And now mentally, I wouldn't put Joe Flacco in the same category as Baker Mayfield in terms of like that mental, like gangster side to him. Right. And but you just brought up Lion quarterback, Jared Goff. He's the Lions quarterback now. He's not the Rams quarterback. And that's for a reason. And he's the name that came to mind when we were discussing, as you were saying, do we sign him now? Do we sign him later? Because that's what you want to see, more data points. Like Jack said, $40 million per year is a lot of money. So
yes.
To see Jack at $40 million, to see it jump 35 versus 40 is a big difference. It's a big difference with the uncertainty going on. I have a feeling that the owners are a little bit more certain than we are about where this cap's going. Surely they obviously have more information than us. And I think that, I think that waiting and seeing more data points, considering that there have been times with Baker where he hasn't been what you would want to see out of a guy you're paying $40 million.
Mostly 2019, right? So you've got, you got his rookie year, which was generally pretty good for a rookie, breaks the rookie touchdown record.
Yep.
And then 2019, all the hype, all the hoopla, and he really didn't play well,
Offensive coordinator, though.
Right. Yeah.
It was the same offensive coordinator from the year before, though, as well. But what changed? Maybe what changed was the fact that, an NFL defensive coordinator's got 12 months now on you, or 8 months to figure out what's going on, figure out what he wants you to do, what he doesn't want you to do. Putting you in positions where he knows you're uncomfortable, putting Freddie Kitchens in positions where he knows that Freddie Kitchens can't deliver. There's a lot there in 2019 that might not necessarily be Baker's fault, which lends credence to the case that it might be time to re-sign him, right?
Agreed. Agreed.
Right. So it's an interesting position to be in that, it's going to come down to obviously, what these guys really think of him, where they think he's going, and what kind of how Kevin Stefanski feels about him. And I think that as an organization too, the fact that this will only be year 2 together has a little bit more uncertainty as well. That say that Kevin Stefanski ends up being a dud this year somehow, and it's just this year is a total wash. It's your worst nightmare. And now that worst nightmare is coupled with the fact that you've got Baker Mayfield on a big contract with another new offensive coordinator, and rather than go back in and draft another quarterback type of thing.
Yeah.
Because the other option out of this scenario, right, is say that is the continuously drafting another quarterback scenario. Once Baker Mayfield comes up on year 4, maybe you trade him away, you draft another quarterback. Like, that's the other formula, is that are we always drafting a quarterback in the first or second round? Obviously, one of the big things that to anyone who watches the draft and things of that nature, you see it, you watch it. The probability of finding a quarterback after those first few picks, finding that franchise guy, is a low percentage thing. So that ends up being the game that they're playing, is the probability of us finding a competent, good starter who's going to cost us very little money higher than the probability of us having success with this player that we're about to pay a lot of money. So with Baker, that becomes the game. And because now Baker goes from being somebody who, by nature of being a competent starter, is worth $35 million in actual value to the organization, while only getting paid X amount of dollars, right? And those become the games. Like, Over the Cap has a valuation page, and on that valuation page, you can see how much value player X provided to his team, and that for those rookie contract players, there'll be a surplus of value, and that's what teams are looking for. They're looking for a surplus, and that's why it's been so valuable to have Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, and Baker Mayfield on the cheap the last few years, and that's what you saw last year. But now that changes, where the drafting becomes all the more important, because now all of these guys are all the more expensive.
Yeah, you got to have – yeah, I mean, that seems like the main key is once he gets on this deal is you've got to draft well, and you've got to have young guys performing, right? And the money has to perform, right? I always hear Chris Sims say on his podcast, like, a team is playing well and doing well when the money is performing. And for the Browns, for the most part, that has been okay. Odell Beckham Jr. injury-wise, not so much. But other than that, that's been okay. So, ultimately, I'll be honest with you, Zach. I saw enough at the end of last year in the second 2/3 of the season. I saw enough from Baker under Stefanski's system, and I really trust Stefanski. I think he is the proverbial adult in the room. I think he is top-notch play caller, top-notch leader of men, and I really think they got the right guy. And so, and he runs an offense that's ideal for Baker. So I'm good with signing it. Like, I would do it this year, but I just don't think they will. What would you do? Would you wait, and are you okay giving him $40 million a year? I use Dak as the comp because that's the most recent one. So his contract we can take a look at here. Would you be willing to give him a contract like this?
I mean, for a team, the team has the cap space, and as we've said, like I do think that the owners know a little bit more about that TV deal that's coming, and I think that $40 million. We're talking about comparables being Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. If the Ravens shell out a ton of money for Lamar Jackson, who doesn't have the same ability to pass that I think Baker has, and like Lamar, the value Lamar is such an interesting data point because the value he adds is kind of, I mean, obviously he's a great runner, right? And the value he also adds is that he makes the running backs more efficient because his ability to run opens up opportunities for the running back because now the defense has to deal with the fact that both guys can run. Josh Allen, similar thing. Baker's mobile, but we don't see the same thing. So say that Josh Allen goes out and he gets a deal worth $42, $43, $44 million a year. Part of the thing that ended up happening with Lee Steinberg got that 10-year, $450 million contract for Patrick Mahomes. And the market, that's what ended up increasing the market past that Russell Wilson $35 million number. And now everyone else is looking for, I want 40, I want 39. And so now the numbers are just going to keep going. So are you saving, is the money you're saving worth, or the question is there more you need to see that is worth the money that it's going to cost you? And I think from where you're sitting, as someone who watched all 16 Browns games and feels comfortable making that statement, right? Like, you know better about Baker Mayfield than I do, right? So deferring to you on that, I agree with your assessment. And then that becomes that question that you're asking yourself is, do we really need to see more to see how much further this thing could go up? And we have the cap space. And the other thing is too, is that I always talk about is that the great organizations are extending players early, and they're also finding low cost free agents. It's not just about drafting. One thing that Bill Belichick did, especially in those early, or did and still does, we even saw this offseason when they went on a bit of a spending spree, but the spending spree was on the mid-tier kind of players, good players that weren't top of market, because he always understood that the top of market free agents were on the market for a reason. Their team didn't want them. And not only did their team not want them, but they're the top of market talent. So someone's going to overpay them because somebody needs them desperately. You know, just looking back at Ndamukong Suh is on the market with the Lions, and the two teams that wanted him were the Ravens and the Raiders and the Dolphins, two organizations who weren't doing well at the time. So those are the kinds of organizations that then go out and they shell out that big money, and you're now competing for that. So with Baker, you can get him at a little bit less money, and by extending him because the market isn't increasing. And if you make a guy wait, he's gonna say, well, you made me wait 2 years. Yeah, you made me wait 2 years. Now it's the market's at 48 million. Give me 50 million. Yeah, you know, who knows where it goes, and from where, and also. Philosophically as well, considering the cap space and what they've got, and Baker Mayfield and what I feel like he is, he's gone through a few offensive coordinator and have proved competent. Jared Goff is a different case, right? Like Jared Goff was horrific his rookie year, and then Sean McVay came in, and it was probably more of the Sean McVay than the Jared Goff. Right. And so he's a little bit different case, but it's good to kind of let all of these ideas swim around when you're considering these things, because these are the things that the organization can be thinking about.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that about Goff and McVay, because the national narrative on Baker is, hey, Stefanski's offense really put him in a great situation to be successful. How could he not be successful with that running game, with that offensive line, with that style of offense that fits in perfectly? So more crediting the environment around him than him. So that's the national narrative. I personally have seen enough. I do agree, though, that Andrew Berry and DePodesta will want to wait just because of the caution. They don't want to get Goffed or Wentz, right? They want this to happen in a right way, and I think that they're okay with guys.
Goff and Wentz. I mean, there's not one example now. There's two. Yeah.
So I think they will be willing to wait to pay that whatever that is. I think he's the guy regardless. I think honestly, another year in this system under Stefanski, he may go out and earn himself a ton more money. Yep. So, and I think that's a good problem to have, though. So.
Jack thought that let's see him repeat the second half of last season.
Yes.
Well, and then so either at the end of this season or during a bye week would probably be the best time to see that deal work out, right? When's their bye week, right? Like, so say bye week's week 9, week 8, whatever it is. You've seen 7 or 8 games worth of him. What do we got?
Week 13.
Week 13, right? So you've seen 12 games of him. That seems like a nice time to get that done. Or, I mean, we've got KC, Houston, Chicago, let's see him play out those first 6 games through Denver and see where he stands, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, that's something with Andrew Berry because we're learning about, his tendencies. I know some GMs are fine doing a deal in the middle of the year and some just won't do it at all because they don't want to have the questions asked every week, right? So it's interesting too, and we'll learn more about what he believes in. He spent some time in Philadelphia as well, so maybe that's kind of a data point you can look at to see what they have done in the past with extensions. But it sounds like you'd be comfortable paying him this if he repeats somewhat of what he's done, right?
Yeah, for sure. This is at some point you just have to give in to the market forces and recognize that you don't want to pay a guy $40 million, but that's just what it costs. And then you figure your way around it. And teams have gotten better and better about figuring out ways. I mean, teams really work their way around the cap. The Saints did it the entirety of the second half of Drew Brees' career and kept them in a place where they were competitive on a yearly basis, which regardless of who your quarterback is a difficult thing to do.
No question. They certainly have found a way. A number of teams have, the cap gymnastics that we saw with all the void years and everything, and the restructures this year was pretty amazing. Really, it was shocking to see how teams just were able to make it happen and kick the can down the road. And I have a question about that for you later in the show, but let's move on to Nick Chubb here, as running back is certainly an interesting topic of conversation. Here's kind of where I'm at with it, and I'll let you tell me what you think. Nick Chubb is a special dude, right? I think he's the top 3 back running the ball in the league. Yep. And I think that he is an ideal guy in the locker room. Like, nobody works harder. He never has anything to say. He's just head down, work, and he's a special back. And a lot of people will say, you can go draft another back that could do the same thing behind this offensive line. That may be true to a certain extent, but everybody says you shouldn't pay these guys these extensions, running backs these extensions. But at the same time, Zach, everybody does. I can't think of one example of a team, no matter how much it's preached that you shouldn't extend running backs, I can't think of one example of a team that didn't extend a star running back.
Yeah, that's very funny. You're right. I mean, it just seems like everyone does it. There's an example right there, though. He's on the Denver Broncos now. He's not in the Chargers. There's Melvin Gordon. Gordon, there's one guy, right? And so when we talk about Chubb, the guy who came to mind for both of us right away is an easy comp because he's not much of a pass catcher, or at least not much of a pass catcher, at least in terms of strategy. Derrick Henry. Right, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb. I mean, that's basically what you're looking at. And so the team asks themselves, is it worth $12.5 million a year to continue to have this guy as your running back? And these are the questions. So when you have that question, right, the questions that you then ask are do we still have a great offensive line? Do we have a great offensive line? Do we have any guys coming up on deals that we won't be able to sign because we've paid Nick Chubb? And would we rather spend that money on the offensive line? Now, the problem for running backs is that because of the nature of their position, and this is one of my main issues that I had with the CBA negotiations, was that there was a change in terms of the franchise tag. The franchise tag now, there was a change in terms of Pro Bowls. Like, there was a Pro Bowl escalator, right?
Here's 22 projection. It's low for running backs, right? It's 12.
Whatever it's going to be for running backs, it's going to be low, right? And part of the deal with signing a new contract is that, and this is my problem with the franchise tag, is that the difference between the franchise tag and between that and then signing a contract in which you get a signing bonus and you get first year money. Like, the difference between the money is substantial. Like, you could sign a signing bonus and get a salary, and your year one money could be $17 million, right? So you got like say you got like a $10 million signing bonus, and then you got paid $7 million, whatever it is. Like, it could be $17 million, it could be $15 million, but then instead you're on a franchise tag that's paying you $10 or $12 million or what have you, whatever it is. And that's my main issue with that. And then because the running back position is the one that gets hammered the most, because everybody knows a running back ages poorly. In my the way I think about it too is that I think wide receivers don't age that well either on average. I think there's a few outliers. I also think there's a few outliers at running back. Adrian Peterson is not great anymore, but he's competent. Reggie Wayne played a long career. They're the guys that have that extensive career into their 30s. Anquan Bolden. There are these guys, but broadly speaking, I do think that most athletes don't age that well. I mean, the average. I looked across for the second book. I looked across various sports, and the age, like the peak age, is like 23 to 28, right? And that's just kind of an estimate. It's not the same for everyone. It's a general number. But then you look at running backs. Now, Nick Chubb came into the league a little bit later, 23 years old. Even if you're young, you're getting beat up, and it's the most brutal position it might be the most brutal position in all sports. When you consider what a running back does, who he does it against, people in MMA don't fight people at different weights. Running backs are running into 300-pound people at full speed. They're running into 250-pound linebackers. It's a hard position. And Nick Chubb will be 26 this season. They could tag him at the end of the year, and then he's 27 years old in that season. Then they tag him again and 28 years old. But this is kind of the war that Le'Veon Bell found himself in. It's kind of the battle that the Carolina Panthers wanted to avoid. So it comes down to, do you want to start a fight with your running back, or do you want to just pay him? Yeah. And the thing about the scenario we're talking about, and when you look at Christian McCaffrey, and you can structure the contract where, from a cap perspective, there's not much difference, but you're spending a lot of money. It's that front end money, right? Like Christian McCaffrey is getting paid how much more than he would have gotten paid on his deal in terms of real money, right? Like now he's at $16 million a year, but then we're talking about these things not working out. Christian McCaffrey has not worked out in year one. Yeah. Right. So Dalvin Cook, it worked out for them this year. Ezekiel Elliott didn't work out. Alvin Kamara working out, but we're just getting started on that contract, right? Like, so, you see a drop off here too. It's 16, 15, 15, then it goes down to 12.6. I mean, I think that's really more so where that market is. And if Nick were to sign a contract there, we're talking about something that suits him much more. And from a team perspective, they have the argument, right? The argument is Derrick Henry, you're not much of a pass catcher. What ends up hurting, is that, if Nick Chubb was more of a passer, he's not going to take that kind of argument. More of a pass catcher, he's not going to take that kind of argument. Alternatively, now Christian McCaffrey had over 1,000 receiving yards the year prior to last year. If you're going to tell me that you can get a running back who's also going to get 1,000 yards receiving, and you're only going to have to pay him $16 million when the wide receiver market is far past that, I can't fault you for doing that. Yep, I understand the logic behind. I understand the logic behind Alvin Kamara. I understand the logic behind Ezekiel Elliott, although at the time that deal is still higher than the market, the rest of where the market is right now. So I don't fault you for signing Christian McCaffrey, but this is how the running back game is, and I guess it's a good problem to have, right? I mean, you're happy you've got a good running back, and without question, Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs in the league. Yeah. So here's how I look at it, right? And great points on all of these guys, right? Especially the McCaffrey point. I mean, that if he's going to catch for 1,000 yards and rush for 1,000 yards, and you're getting $16 million, a year, that's a steal, right? Yeah. So it's a steal. Yeah. Yeah. So here's why I bring up the Derrick Henry deal. It's recent. It's very recent, and they're very similar players. And I think that, and as you've mentioned, the running back market has kind of bottomed out a little bit. Like, okay, it's like this deal is not 4 years for $50 million. The actual deal is 2 years for $25 million, right? So if you look at it that way, because that's the guaranteed money, right? There's an out after 2 years. So 2 years, $25 million.
and the franchise tag is $12 million. Why haggle over $12 million? It's the same price. You're paying the same price. You're just giving him one extra year of guaranteed money. So why not sign him to that deal that looked big and fat, 4 years, $50 million? But in reality, you can get out after 2 years should something happen, and you're giving him 1 year of security. And he's had a lighter load in the NFL. Even last year, he only ran for like 250 carries because he was dinged for a little bit. And Kareem Hunt is taking a big load off of him. So and he's still signed to a contract. So I have no problem with this deal. This deal to me is like, it avoids the franchise tag problem. I think he's going to be a good back for another 2-3 years. And that's what this does. This gets you through 2023 with him. And then you're out with no dead cap on your deal. And I think there's no problem with that.
Yeah, I think that that's a deal that might end up coming right after the season.
Agreed.
You know, Jack thought the same thing. You know, it's probably a guy that, you know, when you sit down and negotiate with someone like that, right? You're like, all right, we're either going to tag you or we'll just give you this same deal as you perfectly described, like, or we just give you the same deal that's basically 2 franchise tags. Whatever 2 franchise tags is in the first 2 years, we'll give you that. And then we'll add on 2 years. And it doesn't really matter if you're good, then you're probably going to be a discount for us at that point because the cap may have gone up a ton. Yep. Not a discount, but you know, you're a good value at that point.
Yeah, if you're still playing well, great. You know, we'll take you for the third year. Yeah.
If you're not, then you know you've made $25 million to retire on and figure out how to take care of your knees and your back.
No question.
You know,
no question. Yeah. I think that's I think that Tennessee was smart for that deal. I mean, we watched Aaron Jones take. I mean, he's on this list here, but he took $12 million, 1 year guaranteed. Zach, I mean, he basically took a franchise tag, but in a deal form. So you know, I just to avoid having to go through all that. So I think that this is something that, because of where the market is at, the Browns are in a good position to offer a deal just like this and be fine with it. I have no problem with doing that. Do you see any downfall to that?
No, I mean, you know, as we discussed too, is that say that you decide on Chubb and not Hunt. Hunt is cuttable next year. You know, say that you decide to go and because I mean, part of the question comes down to how do you feel about who's the third guy in the room right now for you with the running backs?
I think it's the kid they drafted out of UCLA, Demetric Felton. Okay,
yeah. So, I mean, you've also already built in especially if you drafted him. What round did they draft him in?
Late 7, 6.
Yeah. So the probability of him turning into something just based on the numbers of where he was drafted a lot of people say you can wait to draft a running back and you don't need to draft him in the first few rounds from some of the data I've seen.
Yeah.
And, you know, like from some of the data I've seen that, like, you know, a lot of early round draft picks at running back are difference makers. And a lot of the best guys are the earlier round guys. Like Nick Chubb's a second round pick, top of the second round too. Yeah. That was the year that they got was that the year they drafted Garrett?
I believe it was the same year that they got
Mayfield and Ward.
Mayfield, Ward, and Chubb all in the same year.
And they got a guard that year too, right?
Yeah, Dorsey's draft. It was probably his best draft. Yeah.
Did the guard work out?
No, but he starts Austin Corbett, and he's on the Rams. He starts for the Rams offensive line now.
Okay, so he ended up being a good guy too. Anyway, but that's an impressive first four. But yeah, with Chubb, like again, second round pick. That list of guys that you had. Aaron Jones is a late round pick. Alvin Kamara is a third round pick. You know, McCaffrey first, Elliott first, Cook second. Henry was a first or second. What was Henry?
He was high. Yeah, he was up there. I mean,
he was up there somewhere. Joe Mixon was a second or third. Melvin Gordon was a first. Like Saquon Barkley was a first. Now, when we get to the bottom there with Saquon Barkley, he's still on the contract he was drafted
on a rookie deal. Yeah.
But we're talking about a lot of these top paid guys, a lot of these top guys in the NFL. producing wise, our earlier picks. So when we hear about a 7th round pick, the probability of him taking over for Chubb isn't very high. So it leaves you in a position where if they want to continue to have this team the same way it is currently, with the same kind of quality at running back, then re-signing Chubb will be a necessity. And as we saw with the Bucks and what we talked about, some of the ability to do this cap maneuvering, the Browns could move on and could manage that, could manage keeping that organization together. Most of these guys.
Yeah. The cap gymnastics, right?
Yeah, they can figure out if you want to. In many cases, you can figure out a way, unless something crazy like this year happens, which is part of probably what got Julio Jones sent to Tennessee.
Yes, definitely. Got to sign a rookie class, right? They couldn't even sign their rookie class, I don't think. All right. So. Let's move on here. You're watching All Eyes on Cleveland with very special guest Zack Moore of Over the Cap and author of Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions, breaking down all things Browns. We're going through the extensions right now. Real quick, look, so Ward has had his 5th year, just like Baker's had his 5th year option picked up, 1st round pick, right? 4 overall, same year. So if this is his going into his 4th season, but he has that 5th season already picked up. Here, we look at Ramsey at $21 million, Humphrey at $19.5. I have some comps on here, but just for you, evaluation wise, who would you comp him to as a guy on this board?
On that board, I'd comp him to the guys in that $14 million range, or Xavier Howard is a guy that came up with Jack. Jack thought that, in terms of injuries, right? Like Denzel Ward has he put together a full season?
No, that's part of the problem, right? He's not, he has not been durable, but he is, when he has played, he has been elite. And as we talked about before, positions of higher value, I think cornerback is a position of high value. And if you can get an elite one, you got to hang on to him. Now, I want to see him go play 17 game schedule. Zach, I just want to see him play 14 games this year, and I would be happy and feel much better about signing him.
Hey, he got to 13 his rookie year and then 12-12, right? So, 14 is a step forward. I think that I remember that rookie year, him being one of the top guys in the league, him maybe not being that top of the food chain cornerback yet, but him illustrating that he's a guy that you're going to want around for 10 years, something like that, right? And as Jack thought that once he illustrates, injuries didn't stop Howard from getting paid by the Dolphins, so it shouldn't stop Ward being paid either. And at that point, we're looking at a market that's now at $21 million versus 15, which is that's a market that has rapidly increased in the last few years. Now, Byron Jones, that was a market-setting deal just last year, right?
Yeah. So there's a couple of deals here I got for you. Here's a even further breakdown from overthecap.com. But as we kind of look at, this gives you an idea, a little bit more of the guaranteed money and stuff. But here's a couple comps. I have two, one a little higher and one a little lower. I have once again the most recent deal, and then this is Tre'Davious White right here. This is not the most recent deal, but Tre'Davious White's deal is here, and he was at, as we just saw, he's at 17.3. His contract is rather complicated if you dig into the ins and outs of it. But like they should with Ward, they've incentivized playing in games, right? Yeah. As a lot of it. So that would be a part of Ward's deal as well. Question is, would you pay $17 million for him? I think to be determined, kind of, right?
Yeah, this is one of those probably at the end of the season type things. They got one more year with him with that 5th year option. So that he seems to be the kind of he's even more wait and see than Baker. Yeah. I think, right? And especially how do you feel about, the defensive backfield right now, who got signed this offseason, and then Grant Delpit comes back from he was injured most of last year. Was that all last year?
So they addressed it. So they addressed their defense huge this offseason. So they went from their defensive backfield literally as they made that playoff run last year was guys that should not have been on the field, and it's pretty amazing that they were doing it. They were like third string practice squad players on the field playing corner at times. So they really went for depth this year. They signed. And I talked about this for a long time before it happened, and it came true, but I thought that signing the best nickel corner you can, because it's not like a high paid position, but it's a high impact position, is a good way to get better cheap in the secondary. Yes. And they did that. They got Troy Hill from the Rams. So then they signed Don Johnson, the safety. So they got 2/5 of the best secondary in the league from the Rams. And then they brought in at cornerback, they also drafted their first-round pick, Greg Newsome, from Northwestern. So, and then they get Greedy Williams back from injury and Grant Delpit back from injury, two LSU guys that both missed all of last season. So, with you add all those guys in with the guys that are there, you would think they would be deeper. And investing a first-round pick this year kind of gives you an option with Ward a little bit too.
What you just described to me is an ability to get out of the Denzel Ward if it doesn't work out. If he is the player that you want him to be, then you sign him. But
great, yeah.
What you hit on too. So before I get into that, you've clearly there's now depth at cornerback. If you spend a first round pick, you can probably guarantee that you can't guarantee it, but there's a high probability of that guy being competent, right? If you draft anyone in the first round, there's a high probability that guy's going to jump in and be competent right away. Greedy Williams is back. Grant Delpit's back. 2 additions in the secondary as well. And what you said about Troy Hill is super important. The second thing that in the second book, what I kind of sorted out was that 2 positions that I feel are undervalued are linebacker and safety. And they're undervalued for 2 reasons. We look at cornerbacks as the people who cover pass catchers. They're not the only people that cover pass catchers.
No doubt.
Number 1. Number 2 is when we're talking about people who cover pass catchers in terms of like a cornerback's not a very good tackler. So when I think of spending $20 million on a cornerback, I'm now spending $20 million in the hopes that he shuts down his side of the field or who he's against the entire game. That can be super valuable if someone does that. But what I like about the investment in a safety and a linebacker is that they're less expensive and they're better tacklers. And the game, it's tackle football. Tackling is the most important thing, blocking and tackling, right? Like I forget. It wasn't a football book, but I was reading someone talk about like just basic first principles of anything. And the first principles of the sport of football are tackling. And so to invest in safeties and invest in linebackers, but then as you said, you got your slot cornerback as well. He's not going to have the same skill set in terms of his ability to tackle like a linebacker or safety. But the defensive backfield has gotten considerably better this offseason and may stop the need to go out and spend $18 million, $20 million on Denzel Ward, especially if you have such large questions about his health.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and you nailed it when you said it there. It feels like they have prepared themselves to, if they need to, even invest like a mid-round pick if they had to in the future or next year and move on, should they not. Because here's one thing I'm concerned about, right? Denzel Ward's a Cleveland kid, and this was brought up to me on a podcast I did actually last night. Yeah, he's from Cleveland, went to Ohio State, spent his whole life in Ohio. And Jared Mueller from the Browns Wire was on my show last night, and he said he kind of got the feeling like him and his camp and his family might kind of want to spread their wings a little bit. And they have a real high – I can see him asking for like $20 million and the Browns being like, no, man, we can give you 17 or 16, but if you want 20, like I think he views himself as a lockdown corner. Regardless, he may come to the table and negotiate that. And the fact of it is, if he gets to the open market, somebody will probably give it to him, Zach. So, I mean, honestly, he maybe have right for doing that.
So waiting a year, like
Yeah.
say you don't sign him right now, and then he has whatever he's going to make next year.
Yeah.
The number 4 overall pick, 5th-year player option. That was what was tied to Pro Bowls too, is that the 5th-year player option is tied to Pro Bowls. That's the one that's tied to Pro Bowls, not the franchise tag. The 5th-year player option, if you make a Pro Bowl, you get escalated to some other number, right? And I'm not sure if that's the same for 1 through 10. I think it might be for the guys that are drafted after 10th, the Pro Bowl thing. I forget the breakdown of that, but yeah, like you're talking about a guy who really could see that kind of money. Because as we said, somebody needs, like I mentioned, Ndamukong Suh and the Raiders and the Dolphins, some team that's, not like feels like they're, for whatever reason, feels like they're just a cornerback away and they want to spend a ton of money and they're not a very good organization. And what we are describing right now, though, as you were talking about it, which I think is the exciting point to communicate to Browns fans, is that the things that they're doing now are the things that good organizations do. They have a player coming up on free agency in a couple years, and he's at a super important position. All right, let's go draft a first-round cornerback. What the Vikings did when everyone thought they had a ton of cornerbacks, and they drafted somebody who was also a punt returner. I don't recall his name at the top of my head. It was just a couple years ago. But I think it was a kid from UCF. And they drafted a cornerback when people thought they were deep at cornerback. And then suddenly they weren't so deep at cornerback either. Then they got Xavier Rhodes wasn't there anymore. And is Trey Wayne still there? I think Trey Wayne's moved on as well. But yeah, Trey Wayne is somewhere else.
He was on the list. He went someplace else, I think.
Yeah, there he is right there. Trey Wayne's with the Bengals, right? Yeah, I knew he was in the Midwest. So it's and then now you're on to the, and now the guy that you drafted to a group that you thought was very deep now is, he's now your number one guy, and so the Browns are doing things the right thing. And that's one of the important things too, is that the first round pick should probably only be utilized on very specific positions outside of a special case. Yep.
I agree. Makes a lot of sense. You make some really good points there, Zach. You're watching All Eyes on Cleveland, special guest Zack Moore. Let's get to a really interesting case here, and then we'll kind of wrap things up with a couple questions I have for you. You've been fantastic so far, Zach. Let's look at Wyatt Teller. So Wyatt Teller, do you know the story behind Wyatt Teller? So he was
a fifth round.
Yeah, he was a 5th round pick to the Buffalo Bills. He was there. The Browns' right guard wasn't working out. It was actually Corbett, I think, the guy that we talked about that was with the Rams now. But he wasn't working out as they expected. And mid-season or early in the season, maybe I think it was mid-season even, or early in the season, maybe mid-camp, he went out and signed. Dorsey went out and traded a 5th round pick for the 5th round pick, Wyatt Teller, who was like their backup guard at the time. He came in to the Browns, first year, kind of sat the bench, played a little bit. Well, they brought in, obviously, they have the best offensive line coach in the game now, the Browns do, and he came in and went out this year and it was PFF's best guard in football. And a couple of publications have named him the best offensive lineman in football this year, right? So, he blew up. He had a tremendous year this year. So he, from 5th round pick, being drafted overall, to being traded for a 5th round pick, to in 2020 having a career year where, now they're talking about him getting top value guard money as his contract will be up at the end of this year. So the question is, do you sign him? He's only 26 years old, right? So if he goes out and repeats this, nobody was talking about signing him now, but if he repeats that kind of a year where it looks like he is that good again, and I think he will. I don't think it was a fluke by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, the tape doesn't lie, right? So, I mean, he is probably going to command a good amount of money. So we have two contracts to look at. The one you brought up with me, Ali Marpet. This was a comp I saw a couple publications put out. He got 5 years, 54 million, which is like 11 a year, I think. And then the most recent contract and the biggest contract is Joe Tooney at left guard, and he got 16, I think, a year. So where is it? I'm losing my mind here.
You had it right there.
All right. Yeah, right there. So it's 16 a year, and I mean, 16 a year. There it is. So it's pretty crazy. I'm all for this guy. Is a absolute animal in my opinion. And I would tell you this, in my opinion, and you tell me what you think. Bitonio and Treader, first of all, Bitonio is a great guard, and Treader's a terrific center, right? But they both are 30 years old or 29 and gonna be 30 years old. And both of their contracts have no more guaranteed money on them. So if they were to walk away, they can walk away, no dead cap. So I would pay Teller and go away from one of these guys if I had to. And to be honest, it's irked me a little bit, and you can maybe speak on this, but with the whole NFLPA thing, and Tracy Treader is the president of the NFLPA now, and it cost the Browns in OTAs. I mean, right? I mean, it's been a mess because he's the president and he's on the team, and that is always kind of a pain in the ass, right? When the president is on your team. I mean, that I think plays into it a little bit too. He's been a great player, don't get me wrong. He's played hurt a ton of games, hasn't missed a game. He's been tremendous. I love J.C. Treader. But having him be the president and talk about staying away from the facility and all that crap this year was not great and not a lot of fun when he's on your roster.
So you're telling me, man, when I heard him complaining and scared about COVID, I was like, bro, we've been rolling. We didn't take a day off, and I'm like, you are a professional football player, man. Like, don't tell me about you can't be at the facility.
Well, then Juwan James. Yeah, I mean, then Juwan James gets hurt, right, and loses his guaranteed $10 million from the Broncos because he was working out at the facility and went and worked away from the facility because the Players Association is telling him to.
Yep.
How is that in their best interest, right?
Yeah.
I know it's a battle for control for them, and it's like a pushback against the ownership, but I don't think it really affects ownership. I don't think they give a shit if you're there or not. I think it's the coaches that care.
It illustrates this battle for control over like organized team activities illustrates. I mean, I get it; it's a job now, but we've got. I don't really have any time or sympathy for that line of thinking from them, right? Like it's like practices for football players are easier than ever. Like I don't mean to say football's easy, but the contact has decreased. They've made a bunch of concessions in terms of what players do, and I get that you don't want to do organized team activities and here and there. It didn't serve the players, and from a perspective of the fan base, like a bunch of people who have been going through this thing together for the last 16 months don't want to hear some football player talk about how disprivileged he is for having to go work. I'm sure there's plenty of people who would love to do the work that he has to do. And so I what you're talking about is music to my ears. I agree with you completely. I don't think they get rid of them because of the amount of cap space they have, but it does leave them options. So what this means is that they have a decision potentially of which two of these three players do we want to keep.
Right.
And that's what you're bringing up, is that we're not going to get rid of Treader and Bitonio maybe, but we are, or for that matter, Odell and Landry, or Odell, or maybe one of those four guys doesn't have a good year. I mean, the NFL is you have to prove yourself every single week, every single year, because next year is not guaranteed. In every other sport, or sometimes it is guaranteed depending on where you are in your contract. But in every other sport, right? Like in every other sport, the money you sign for is the money you get. So to keep earning the money that you sign for, you have to hold up your end of the bargain to, unfortunately, and that's unfortunate as well, though. I mean, as much as I like that you have to keep proving yourself, that's great, but it is also unfortunate that players have to keep doing that. But but it puts the team in a position where if Teller is who he was last season, which it's hard for a great season on the offensive line to be a fluke. Although, is it partially, the offensive line coach Bill Callahan making him look better?
And the system. Yeah, that's what some people have brought up. Yeah,
potentially, but what did he teach him that lives on with him forever now?
Correct. Yeah, I just don't see it as a fluke, Zach. I just can't imagine. I mean, he just is a mauler, and he's perfect for the zone run scheme. Even their gap schemes, he was tremendous in. I just think he's a player on the rise. He's 26. I'm just saying I'd rather sign him.
Yeah.
And pay him more. Ali Marpet is the comp here, right? But I would even pay him more than him.
13, 14, 15. You get to determine if you sign him this year. You get to determine far more what his value is versus next year, and also, we're talking about franchise tags, right? We're talking about Chubb, and we're talking about Teller, and we're talking about the tags. So they're both tag options, and so if you can get one of those guys signed and dealt with, so that you can threaten the tag with the other guy, essentially, because I look at the tag as a threat. The tag is a threat, like, hey, we're going to give you
a weapon,
we're going to give you $10 million rather than 15 in cash, right? So, getting one of these guys signed, again, talking to Jack doesn't think they pay him elite guard money, but I mean, if you're going to pay anything elite money after quarterback, the offensive line is a good place for me. And it almost, would you rather spend that money on a tackle than a guard? Yeah, but if you've got a guard who you can get for $14, $15 million, versus the tackles are now, above $20 million a year. So, these are just the market rates now. And if you have a mauler who looks like he's going to be great, and what I was saying about Callahan too is that once you learn technique, that technique doesn't go away.
Yeah.
So I think that the future's bright for him.
And the nice thing is too, Zach, is they have guys behind these guys, like Nick Harris is like their built-in backup center, like ready to take over when Shredder does move on. And they have some guys that they've drafted. They drafted James Hudson this year, and they have some other guys on the roster on the offensive line who have been working under Callahan, who, when got called into duty last year, performed really well when guys got hurt or dinged, that could probably fill in. I love Bitonio, don't get me wrong, but I would rather pay a 26-year-old Teller $16 million than pay Bitonio $10 million to stick around at age 30. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah. No, I agree with that premise. And the fact that moving on and from an older guy and going with the younger guys is probably always a smarter move, especially when you talk about dead cap space too. Let's think about assets, right? Like those four guys we talked about releasing, they're also tradable. The Browns currently have a draft pick in each round, an extra fourth and an extra seventh. When you think about seventh round picks, don't just think about, or like a later fifth, sixth, even a fourth. Don't just think about it in the context of what they're going to draft with that. Think about it as what they package with something else to move up in the draft. Those later round picks are great pieces of a package to trade with someone who's like, yeah, we'll take an extra 7. We want to take another shot in the dark. We know the probability is low that we'll find a guy, But if you want to move up 4 picks to get the guy you wanted, we'll do it for you. And
that's a great point. I didn't even think about that, but that's a great point. Somebody rebuilding their offensive line who wants an all-pro guard like Batonio at age 30 for $10 million, which doesn't look like a ton of money at this point. Yeah, I mean, you could trade him and get a fifth or whatever, So that's a really good point, Zach. I didn't even think of that. So
those late round picks, that's what they're for, in my opinion. They're for the shots in the dark though too. But like, principally speaking, when you're thinking about like a 5th or 6th round pick and you're getting one of those back for something, that might turn into you hear stories about it. Like I don't recall, but like what ended up happening with this one, but like. Calais Campbell got traded for a few picks, and then I remember I believe that some of those picks were then packaged with something else that then became something else. So it's similar to the Carson Wentz trade where it's like the Carson Wentz picks that they got became like 10 picks. Like there were like 4 picks or 3 picks that they got that became 10 or 12 picks. So those 10 or 12 picks then became, for the Browns, they became cheap labor, 10 or 12 guys on the roster that you drafted. So you were fielding a competent and at least team that won one game or wasn't competent, but it didn't look like you were putting out a high school team for those undrafted free agents, right? Like,
yeah.
So it becomes a very everyone has a purpose. Every asset in the sport, late round pick, early round pick, older guy that you want in the room to teach your younger guys how to build a good offensive line. Every asset has a value.
No question. You're absolutely right. Great stuff. Good stuff on all this extension stuff. Zach, you've been outstanding. I've got one more question for you, man. Let me bring this down here. All right, there we go. Thank you, Mikey. All right, so we're going to let me ask you this. The teams that, we talked about this cap crunch here a lot. And what surprised me, Zach, is that the Kansas City Chiefs of the world and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of the world, your Super Bowl teams, who looked like they were up against it, were able to keep everybody, right? They were able to keep everybody, and they're running it back pretty much with everybody, with the exception of maybe a guy here or there. And they did this, with what I'm learning more and more, and kind of learned really in this cap crunch year, is that if you want to get something done as an NFL team, there's a way to do it. Like there's a way to kick the can down the road and do it, restructure, void years, whatever it is, right? But will it come back to bite them at some point?
Everything comes back to bite someone eventually, right? In some capacity, if you're not taking your responsibility, kicking the can down the road with any problem. I mean, not just football, right? Like, hey, I got a drinking problem. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Right? Like, I'll deal with it next month. But then next month comes and you're like, damn, like I'm drinking more than I was before. Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yep.
Right. Like, so, a problem always comes. But they wanted to keep a core together that got them there. And those problems end up being where at some point we're going to have a conversation about the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, or the Buccaneers without Tom Brady when he's gone. And there's going to be a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever where things have they don't have anything around them, right? Like Patrick Mahomes might find himself in a position when Travis Kelce is gone, when Tyreek Hill is not as explosive, when he's 30 years old and he suffered some knee injury along the way that just takes a step off. Like one of the things that people don't understand, all of us don't understand, is that little ankle injury or that little knee injury, that player that we thought was coming back a week later never is that player again, or never finds that again, because the level of competition is so high. The people that they're going up against are so elite that a loss of a second, a loss of a step, or a loss of whatever, can make a world of difference. So both organizations were able to keep the core together and kick the can down the road, and that problem ends up coming back at some point. But it won't be this year, and it might not be next year. It might be the year after that. It might be the year after that. But at some point, those problems become. And when we talk about void years too, I can't really see through. I'm not sure if either of the teams use the void years but like the Eagles were using that for a while, where like you'd have a guy that you'd sign to a signing bonus, and it would be like there would be 2 void years on the end of it, or a void year, and you're working under the premise that this is the guy you'll want, so you re-sign him, and then you'll kick that further down. The Saints were kind of big on this too.
Like Taysom Hill's deal this year, right? They came out and announced that huge deal for Taysom Hill, and then you looked at the details, and there was no new money in the deal. So what they did is they took his signing, but they took all his salary, rolled it into a signing bonus, added 4 void years, called it a new deal, and they just basically, prorated out his deal and saved themselves a bunch of cap room. There was no new money on the deal, but yet it was announced like it was a brand new deal to everybody.
No new money on the deal this year, but next year there's $8.9 million in dead money if they get rid of him, right? So that's the perfect. You offered up the perfect example of this, because that means that either they have to re-sign him to something, or they got $8.9 million on the books. So those are like the kind of things that end up starting to cut into your salary cap. But $8.9 million when the cap's $200 million isn't the same as $8.9 million 15 years ago. This was one of the things that Dan Snyder always had a problem with, and I wrote about it in one of the 2 books. But like the organizations would the only thing that illustrates like a team can't be successful is dead money. And this was way back. Like now the dead money doesn't count as much. But there was a Washington Post article about the Redskins, and at a time when like the cap was like $100 million, they had like $25 million worth of dead money. Yeah. So like that was what it used to be and where they used to be at. But yeah, the bills always come due. Money and maybe they don't run into issues because of the amount of money that could be coming to the league soon. In terms of that TV deal we talked about. But if that money does come, we are about to see huge increases in every market. And what frustrates me even more, knowing that TV deal is going to come, is that the last CBA didn't really give the rookie contract players enough of a boost, and it didn't decrease the amount of years in the rookie contract. The fact that a player goes and plays in college, this is me on my soapbox. The players go to college for 3 or 4 years. They play football for free for a university. And then the NFL says, yeah, we have to pay you these wages because like we don't know if it's going to work out or not. Like, these are the built-in wages. Like you just get drafted and then this is what we pay you. And then, as I stated, 60 to 65% of the NFL is in their first 4 years. Therefore, it becomes this thing where like the player is always the one who's taking on the risk financially and physically. The player is the one that played for free to earn his way into playing for, if he didn't end up being a first-round pick, he ends up playing himself for less than 1% of the salary cap immediately upon being in the second round. I mean, we're talking about Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's been tremendous. Nick Chubb's a running back. So he's never going to get a fair shake in his money, in his career, the way that maybe he would have otherwise. Because if you make the draft an auction draft, we're having an entirely different conversation about running backs, because I think running backs are important. A lot of people say running backs don't matter, this or that. I think that second contract running backs end up being a bad value, but I think that having a good running game and finding that rookie contract running back is super valuable to you. Having a guy who, we see it with young quarterbacks too, is that having Baker Mayfield with two running backs back there that are competent takes a load off his shoulders. He doesn't have to. I mean, we remember, maybe like I mean, Peyton Manning always had good running backs, but, you can recall in your mind some young quarterback who felt like he had it all on his shoulders and he didn't have anything beside him to run the football. And, to point being, if we have an auction draft, things are entirely different and people have an entirely different perception of value and all of that,
That's interesting. Zach, you are fantastic guest. Amazing stuff, man. I kept you for a super long amount of time. We talked about a ton of stuff, but it's going to make for, great show. I appreciate you lending us your time and your expertise. Go to, can they go to Amazon to get the book? All right.
Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions.
Yes. Go to Amazon and buy Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. Zack Moore. Zack is writer with Over the Cap and author of the book we just mentioned, Caponomics, Building Super Bowl Champions. Certainly an expertise on the salary cap, a capologist, as we would say. And excellent job today, Zach. You were fantastic, and you did. I'll have to thank Jack for talking with you, talking so much Browns with you because you knew your stuff. So thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, Jack's my guy. Thanks for having me on. This was great, and just get me talking about these topics again and strategy and all that kind of stuff. As I said, I'm into jiu-jitsu and everything right now, but talking strategy is my thing. So. I really appreciate having such a good partner in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It was my pleasure. And they can follow you on Twitter at Zack Moore 10P.
Yes.
All right. And absolutely follow him there. And maybe we can have you again during the season sometime. I would love it.
All right, man. You can have me anytime you want.
Jack. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Later, bro. Have a good day.
It's a bonus edition Saturday episode. Big thanks to Zack Moore. He was outstanding. If you are watching the show live or on playback, hit the like button for us down below and subscribe if you get a chance before you get out of here. We're going to get you out of here now and go enjoy the rest of your Saturday night and the rest of your weekend here from All Eyes on Cleveland. A couple of things real quickly. Jarvis Landry's softball game before the game, according to Nate Ulrich, speaking to the press, said OBJ looks better than he did last year. This is from Jarvis Landry, referencing workouts in Texas that they just went through last week with Baker and company. So that's good news. And look out, rest of the NFL, right? So that's awesome there. And let's hope that that's all true. We have big news coming for All Eyes on Cleveland. I can tell you this, it's going to be, having something to do with tickets. We're going to get you maybe some tickets hook up, and we'll talk about that as we move forward here with the show and get more official on that. But yeah, for sure. All Eyes on Cleveland. Keep coming back. Hit the like button. Hit subscribe. Hit the notification bell on your way out. We appreciate it. It helps us out a ton. Big thanks to Zack Moore. Once again, he was outstanding. For Mikey on the ones and twos, my name is Brad Ward. Have a fantastic weekend. And like always, go Browns.